In verse 19, we're going to read about his daughter-in-law here. Now his daughter-in-law, Phinehas' wife, was with child, due to be delivered. So, probably 8 or 9 months pregnant here. And when she heard the news that the ark of God was captured, and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she bowed herself and gave birth, for her labor pains came upon her. Think about the bad news she hears. It's hard enough being pregnant and wondering when the baby's going to come out, and it's hard enough giving labor. But she hears about the loss of, 34,000 men in battle. She hears about the death of her husband. She hears about the death of her brother-in-law, her father-in-law, and she hears about the ark being captured. It's as if you and I maybe heard about, something bad happening in DC at the White House or in New York City. This is a national event here. And the grief that she experiences, it induces labor in her. In verse 20, and about the time of her death, she dies giving birth here, sadly. The women who stood by her said to her, "Do not fear, for you have borne a son." But she did not answer, nor did she regard it. You see, in Jewish culture, the birth of a son was wonderful news, more so than the birth of a female. And they try to encourage her. They try to say, "Hey, you got a son." But it says in verse 20, she didn't regard it. In other words, she had no desire to live. In verse 21, then she named the child Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed from Israel, because the ark of God had been captured, and because of her father-in-law and her husband." Interesting name here, Ichabod. Some of the most popular baby names of 2022 are as follows: Arlo, Auguste, Betty, Bruno, Cosmo, Daphne, Evo, Jonah, Oren, Rhodes, Sienna, Theo, Vander, and Wells, and so on. I don't know how you feel about those names, but they are supposedly popular. What's interesting, if you read about why they are popular, it's because a lot of those names are used in songs or TV shows. Here we have baby Ichabod. In elementary school, maybe you read the story, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and you remember Ichabod Crane. Now, he's named Ichabod because the ark was captured. You see, like this daughter-in-law, many believe that the glory of the Lord departed when the ark was captured. Instead, the glory of the Lord had departed way before, when Israel had turned their backs on God. That word departed in Hebrew is the word exile, just like the children of Israel going into exile. The ark of God is now in exile, away from Israel. But even though the ark of God is away from Israel, we'll see that God is still working in the nation with a different mouthpiece behind the scenes, using Samuel. In verse 22, she'll say this: "The glory has departed from Israel. The ark of God has been captured." You see, God will begin to work through calamity. God wanted to work through blessing Israel. He wanted to work through giving Israel a victory. But if he can't work through giving Israel a victory, he's going to work through their calamity. Here's specifically how. There will be justice in what happens to Eli and Hophni and Phinehas. They allowed the exploitation of women to continue. They allowed offerings to be abused by the people. In one sense here, God will get justice and his name will be glorified. Righteousness will be lifted up. Another way we'll see God's name being glorified through calamity is this: the nation will receive the correction they deserve in turning their backs against God and in walking away from him.